Hello and welcome back to Socially Distant Discover Nature. I've not done a great deal in the time off other than run out of Robinson squash, which is deeply upsetting. And I guess what also is deeply upsetting is the horrendous reports of racism and injustice and police brutality coming from America. I don't think I have any wisdom to add on the subject other than to say that whatever your response has been to it, I hope you are staying safe. So yeah, okay. Now there is someone, persons unknown, banging in the distance, so I apologise for any audio problems that we're going to have. I'm also going to try and make the editing process easier for myself. So when I'm glancing away and looking at paper and reading off my phone, I think I'm just going to leave that in there, and all the mistakes as well. More mistakes, I'll leave more mistakes in. So we'll carry on with all that sort of stuff. Now then, onwards with our catch-up. I've had some photos sent in from Jack, and she sent in this lovely picture of a bumblebee. And if I think I've got my notes right, it's a tree bumblebee. These are one of the nice ones to tell because they've got the ginger thorax, ginger middle section, black abdomen, and then that little white tip to the end of it, also known as a white tail. So really, really good for identification purposes. She also sent in this amazing close-up of a red clover, and you can see the flower itself is made up of lots of tiny flowers, and that's what the bees are going into and getting the nectar. And pollen from clover is one of the most nutritious sources, and several studies, scientists believe that some of the declines in bumblebees is now due to the lack of the big clover fields, so the lack of that really nutritious pollen. What else have we got? Oh yes, of course. So she sent in a picture of a damselfly, and people seem to be starting to see damselflies everywhere now. I've seen a few first of the year during my time off, and this one, after much staring at the guidebook, I reckon is a blue-tailed damselfly. So these are quite nice ones to identify because generally they've got a long thin black abdomen with a blue blob on the end. Now this one is slightly greenish, and it seems to be an immature one, so it could be almost freshly emerged. It's not quite got its full sky blue colour. It's a nice one, so I recommend looking out for that. We've also had Tracy from Dunnington send in this video of pyracantha bush, which is full of flowers and full of bees, and we'll just pass over to her video now and let her tell you a little bit about that.
So this is the pyracantha, which John would like me to dig up, ideally. And I just want to show you why I like it, even though it's a bit of a monster and I can't get it all into one shot anymore. But it's all in full blossom now. The birds love it. The birds were nesting in it earlier this spring. And I'm just going to take you right up to it because it's alive at the moment. How could you cut that down? I can't cut that down. We could maybe give it a haircut. But I'm not cutting it down.
I've also had Emma McKenzie, the creative writing tutor from the ecotherapy programme. Her and her daughter have made a model tansy beetle to go with the tansy beetle wheel, life cycle wheel that we featured in a previous episode. It looks incredible. I don't know what it's made of. It looks like they painted a pebble with metallic paint and stuck on bits of something, possibly metal. Whatever it is, I love it. Very much approve of that. Any tansy beetle related artwork, any artwork at all, continue to send it in to us. Now then, last week, or the last week that we were here, I was glancing through the FSC's shield bug identification chart and I noticed one called a rhombic leather bug, which is that one. Ooh. And I suggested it might be like a name of a heavy metal band or a lead singer of a heavy metal band, and weirdly someone has sent in a video and that it is a kind of it is a musician, and so they're sort of like punk rocker. You can tell from this conversation I don't really know much about music or genres, but in essence they have sent in Rhombic Leatherbug's video of his #1 hit, The Rules of Nature. So, well, it's pretty spectacular, so I'm going to play it and then go forth and then spread the word.
If you see a fox, don't put it in a box. If you see a deer, don't poke it in the ear. If you see a dog, don't hit it with a log. Yes, these are the rules of nature. These are the rules of nature. If you see a bug, it doesn't want a hug. If you see a bat, don't feed it to the cat. If you see a little goat, don't grab it by its furry throat. Yes, these are the rules of nature. These are the rules of nature. If you're walking in the woods, don't trample on the flowers, or the trees will get you with their supersonic powers. Gnarly twigs reach out for you, grab your arms and both legs too, pull you up into the sky, hear you scream and watch you die. These are the rules of nature. These are the rules of nature. If you see a tiny snail, don't squash it with a metal rail. If you see a baby coot, don't crush it with your hobnail boot. If you see a thrush, don't grind it into gooey mush. Yes, these are the rules of nature. These are the rules of nature. If you see a hare, don't hit it with a chair. If you see a rabbit, you mustn't try and grab it. If you see a hog, don't try and drown it in a bog. Yes, these are the rules of nature. These are the rules of nature. These are the rules of nature. Yes, these are the rules. Got it?
You see, that's just great. I don't know why he's not achieved greater success. I don't know why he's drifted into obscurity, but such is life, and perhaps airing it here to our modest viewers will give him a new lease of life. So on to the main body of today's episode, and I wanted to give a little bit of a catch-up on what's going on in the garden, but also from a perspective of providing food for pollinators throughout the year. So in a previous episode we looked at the creation of the wildflower meadow. We also looked at kind of, I can't remember what we called it, like a flower sequence. So having something in flower from as early in the year as possible all the way through till maybe October, November. Different species flowering at different times obviously, but you make a whole kind of spectrum that lasts many, many months. And the idea is that whatever bumblebee, hoverfly, butterfly is around, they'll always have something to feed from. So in a past episode we covered plants that flower in February and also March, and I made some simple photographic ID charts, and Ivana kindly put them on the St. Nick's Discover Nature webpage. Well, we've got some updated ones now. So we have flowers in April and also flowers in May. So I'm going to ask Ivana to put these on the website again, and you can download them. I should stress they're based on, well, they are based entirely on my experience in my garden. So the flowers on these charts do not represent an exhaustive list. There are probably many more that are in flower during this month, and depending where you are in the country, if you're further north or further south or have different conditions, things may flower for longer or shorter. So this is very much a sort of specific thing, but it's kind of to give you just a few ideas. And in all honesty, the way I've chosen my plants... Oh, phone. Really should have turned that off. Whew. Oh, it's my mum. What was I saying? Yes, the way I chose my plants before the pandemic happened was just to stroll around a garden centre on a hot sunny day, and I bought the ones which had the most bees on. Or I looked at the ones that had the most bees on, and then one got some seeds that were cheaper and then grew them. But either way, the most bees was the dominating factor. So we'll start with the meadow. I suppose it's quite a grand term for something that's about 2 by 4 meters, but I'm kind of proud of it. I like it, and it's nice sitting next to it with butterflies flitting around in summer and little grasshoppers doing their grasshoppery song. But what's happened recently is kind of... can't remember the exact month, to be honest, but I think around about May time I had salad burnet flower within the meadow. So they're little sort of pom-pommy flowers. It's a very subtle flower. You've got to get quite close to see any form of colour, but I did a bit of filming. So this is a native British wildflower, and I planted plug plants that I bought from a garden centre in there. It's doing really well. I haven't actually seen any pollinating insects visit it. Possibly because I've not been there at the right time, but it's, yeah, a bit odd. Now, what you can also notice is that there are some plants in that meadow that are completely huge and dominating, particularly the knapweed, which is going to get the little purple thistle flowers on. Now, what I should have done with the meadow was completely cut most of it, if not all of it, down, but I have left some of the plants to grow, so it's just, I guess, a security. I think I'm slightly frightened that if I cut everything down, nothing will grow back. So I always leave one of the big plants, like the knapweed or the muskmallow. You just don't cut it back and let it bump itself up. So that is now taking over a little bit like a triffid of monstrous proportions. Another thing I've tried is, when I went to the Lower Derwent Valley, they've got this plant called Great Bonnet, which has almost like little raspberry shaped flowers on. Beautiful, kind of vibrant, carmine red colour, amazing. I grew some from seed in here, in the greenhousey conservatory thing, and I planted them. I hope what I planted was Great Bonnet and not just some random seeds that have come up in the soil. It's not flowered yet. I'm slightly pessimistic, but we will see. Just little tinkerings, little tiny tinkerings, which I'm sure probably won't improve the biodiversity of the meadow, but they please me, and it just makes it a bit more interesting and colourful. And I like a challenge sometimes. Another thing that I've been trying to enhance the meadow with is vetch. So members of the pea family has tufted vetch. There are other vetches that I can't remember the name of, but my favourite one is the ones at St. Nick's, which have got like purple drifts of flowers. They're absolutely lovely. So what I've done is I acquired some seeds from a nature reserve that will remain nameless, because I don't know if I asked permission to take the seeds from not St. Nick's. No! Don't tell Ivana or Jonathan or anyone else. So the seeds that I definitely didn't steal from St. Nick's, I planted them, grew them, vetch plants are growing, and I've now planted them in my meadow, and I will hopefully get to enjoy the flowers before the St. Nick's police come and cart me away for seed theft. Grand theft seeds. I can't think of a Grand Theft Auto joke. Whatever, there probably isn't one. Also, I'm not obsessed with alliums, but the alliums within the meadow are also flowering. Big, kind of puffy, not quite globe-shaped flowers. They're absolutely great, and they have had bees coming on. A lot of tree bumblebees, actually, so they're looking quite nice. Perhaps even more interesting and spectacular is the speedwell in the lawn. Germander speedwell, I think. It must, well, I didn't plant it. It's got to have been there either as seed or as low-growing plants. And all it took was relaxing the cutting regime of the lawn, so mowing slightly less to allow it to come up and flower. And it carpets the lawn in this sort of blue swathe. I've got some footage to show you. It's incredible, and I have seen bumblebees going to it frequently, getting the nectar or the pollen or both. Very, very good. It's a little balance of the cutting regime because I need to let it grow enough to let it flower, but also later on in the year I do need to cut it down, the whole meadow down, so it doesn't get out-competed by the grasses. So it's striking that right balance to get it just so. With regards to the garden itself, which is mainly what the charts refer to rather than the meadow flowers, I've had, there's no we, it's just me, I've had a lot of success with several flowers that have a really long flowering period. So lungwort is one of them, one of the early flowering ones. I think it might have even been around since February, and it was still going all the way through until the end of May, which is really good. And it's the same with symphytum. It's kind of a type of comfrey. That's had a really long flowering period. And also the forget-me-nots as well. They've been wondrous all the way from early, potentially February, all the way through until the end of May. And as we rolled into June, they've started to kind of lose the flowers, die back. But they've certainly done a good job in the meantime. As we came into April, there was some new flowers that flowered. It's an insightful comment. We had bluebells. These were purely planted. I bought them from Brunswick. I have largely failed to grow bluebells in the garden that come back again, and I wholly suspect that the ones I planted this year will die off and never be seen again, but they were very pretty while they're around. What I did have more success with is the snake's head fritillary that keep popping up. A very, very nice flower, kind of a bell-shaped thing that hangs down with a sort of checkered snake skin pattern. Comes in kind of pinky purple and pale cream. Very nice looking, but short-lived flowering period. They didn't really, they popped up in April, they flowered, and they really stopped flowering by the end of April, but it's just another thing to add into your flower sequence. Moving into May, we had the remnants of the bluebells, but the thing that have started to pop up in May, as I've said, as well as in the meadow, in the garden itself we've got more alliums, which are now still flowering well into June. A few different types of allium, so some were really early, kind of May, and they've gone now, but new different types of allium are flowering now that it's June. A new long flowering period species that popped up in April is red campion. So we discussed this in a wildflower identification episode. The seeds were from the Lower Durham Valley. This time did have permission. They grow really easily and absolutely everywhere, and they've been flowering since April all the way through May. They're still going, they're still out there. A great kind of splash of pink colour, really cheers up the garden, and fairly idiot-proof to grow, which is probably why I can grow them. So that's quite nice. Certainly throughout May, possibly even earlier, there's been the cotoneaster shrub / bush, which has been flowering. My partner calls it the bee bush because it's alive with buzzing sound of all sorts of bees. The one in my front garden is full of honeybees. My partner's one is choked full of bumblebees. Spectacular. Unfortunately, I have no footage. I didn't manage to film it before the horrendous weather turned against me and the rain, so there might be some archive footage of it, but just take my word for it, cotoneaster, very good for bees, very, very good. As we've rolled into June, there's a few new flowers that are starting to come out, and the key one that I really like and think is really beautiful and quite weird and interesting is the foxglove. Very tall, these kind of sort of open bell shaped flowers that hang in almost vertical rows, make a flower spike. They are beloved by bumblebees. The bumblebees will almost disappear up into the flower to get to the nectar and pollen. So you might see a foxglove and you hear a foxglove buzzing, and that's because there's bumblebees in there, and eventually if you watch long enough they will come out and buzz away. So yeah, foxgloves, very good. I do not recommend them if you have young children who might eat flowers or plants, or dogs that might eat plants. They are extremely poisonous. Digitalis, it interferes with the heart. I think it makes it speed up. I'm not quite sure, but it can be lethal. So do not plant them in any of those circumstances. But if you are, yeah, just be careful. Don't die. Also, we've got lupins. They're not a native one, but they're a garden favourite. I think they're from California, possibly. Very beautiful and also quite popular with pollinators, as far as I know, although I haven't seen any go into the lupins yet. So maybe next episode I'll tell you that that's all a load of rubbish. And the final thing that I want to mention is another one that's come out as we've ticked into June, which also has a fairly long flowering period, and it's Oxide Daisy. So if you imagine a standard daisy, you've enlarged it using a gigantorray, which is definitely a thing. Big kind of yellow centres, big white petals, slightly spoon-shaped leaves, I think they call it. I've got loads of them. I went a bit overboard sowing seeds, and they're all very nice and vertical until the winds we had a week or 2 weeks ago completely flattened them. So I've now got lots of flattened Oxide Daisies, but they are flowering, and they do a long flowering period. So these are another native wildflower, quite popular with the hoverflies, although again, since they've flowered, the weather has been atrocious and cold and rainy, so I haven't seen any hoverflies anywhere, let alone on the Oxide Daisies. But they're another one I kind of recommend. I've also managed to have a success with a homemade bee home, which is probably the first success I might have ever had. I noticed in the garage wall there's a few kind of chips and holes, and there were some red mason bees exploring it, so I knocked together a quick home out of one of those plastic, I know plastic's bad, soup containers, which I mainly got to make bee homes out of. I'm not really a big fan of soup. Empty that out, take the lid off, shove a load of bamboo canes in, slightly too many, it started to split apart, and then I wired it to the wall next to the guttering, and within about a week there was, well, straight away there was red mason bees coming in to investigate, but I think from the hair colour on the face, I can't remember what colour, pale? They were males, so they were coming to see if there was any females to mate with, but eventually there was actually females came in and nested in it, and I can see one of the tubes has now been sealed up with mud, classic mason bee architecture. So I'm very pleased with that. In the space of 2 weeks since putting it up, it's occupied, and goodness knows how many eggs in their little compartments are in there. But hopefully they will all hatch out next spring, and I'll be able to see them coming out, which is good. The final thing I want to talk about is small-scale gardening for pollinators. I've had a few questions come in asking me that how do you do this on a much smaller scale? Because I know I am really lucky and privileged to have that garden out there, and it's a delight. I'm very lucky, but I'm also painfully aware that not everyone has such a big space, or even any space. Sometimes it might just be a backyard or a window box, something like that. So how can you do it on a small scale? Well, someone asked about, I think it was Jack, asked about growing wildflowers in pots. That is potentially a good idea. I myself have had not a lot of success with it. I think it's possible I've used the wrong compost, I've not selected the right flower seed. It's been a bit slapdash, and you can see from the footage they're not great, but if you did it properly from scratch, you might have some luck with that. But alternatives are lavender. You get all sorts of lavender. Lavender is amazing for bees, and with lavender, I only seem to be able to grow it in pots. If I put it in the ground, it's usually dead within 3 months. I'm a terrible gardener. But lavender in pots is really good. You can get small ones, big ones, whatever size pot you really want, you can get some lavender. And that's got quite a long flowering period, really good for the bees. Another one I might recommend is a sedum sort of hybrid. They've got these big flat pink flowers, something like Autumn Joy, I think it's called. These are quite good for butterflies, hoverflies. They're a late flowering one, so I don't think it's going to start flowering until August, but it does last a bit into the autumn. That's another good one. And then finally, it's worth investigating dwarf buddleias, so small buddleias. Just be careful that they are small buddleias and that they don't start off small and grow big. You want a buddleia that's going to start off small and stay mostly small in a pot. And that's the end of the section on the wildflowers and the meadow updates. And just a reminder, all of these flower photo guides will be available on the St. Nick's Ecotherapy Discover Nature webpage to download. So now we are going to go back to our roving wildlife reporter, Genghis Marazipan. And no one is more surprised about this than me. I did try to get rid of him and fire him, but apparently he is a member of a union. Yeah, who knew? Admittedly, it did seem to be the Union of Federated Cheesemakers, but they had a very expensive looking lawyer who gave me lots of legalese documents. So, for now, we're kind of stuck with him. So, Genghis, always a pleasure. What have you been up to?
Hello, Genghis Marazipan here, the wildlife not roaming about reporter, because I've decided that I've seen your viewer sending in these camera trap footage, and I thought that's the answer to my prayers. Don't need to roam around. I'll get a camera trap and set it up, and the wildlife will come to me, which is exactly what I've done. So I'd like to show you this amazing footage that I've just got. Have a look at this. There you are. I think you'll agree that's jolly impressive, don't you think? Back to you in the studio.
Well, that's certainly a thing. I'm not angry. I'm not angry. I'm just disappointed. And also angry. Now, before we leave, we're going to have a return to our art atrium. And this week's entry, this week's piece of work is from Lycia, aged 4, who's done these wonderful colourings and drawings of all sorts of creatures, which are very cheerful and lovely. So thank you very much, Lycia, for sending them in. It's much appreciated. And a reminder, if anyone else, I'm looking around as if there is a physical audience here. Tomato plants, if you want to send something in. Bag of pegs hanging on the wall, if anyone wants to send something in, anything that's a sentient life form rather than just a plant, do send in some artwork, drawings, paintings, whatever you'd like. I would love to see them. As always, if you've got any contributions to send in, artwork, nature sightings, Discover Nature people, send them to the usual place. Everyone else, you can find us on Twitter, or it's ecosapienshow@gmail.com. Now, inspired by Jack and her damselfly photo, next week we're going to have an episode on dragonflies and damselflies. And even if the weather is terrible and I can't find any, I reckon I've got some archive footage and props I can wave around just to give you a little brief introduction to them. So that is our plan. Thank you very much for watching and for being patient with me while I had some time away on the other side of the camera. And yeah, so stay safe, take care of yourselves, and I will see you next week. Goodbye. I should point out, if you would like to listen to The Rules of Nature by Rhombic Leverbug, again, without any of this extraneous plant information, what I'm going to do is upload it to YouTube as an individual video so you can pass it around and share it. Make it go viral. Why not? Let's get a viral hit. I suppose that's probably bad terminology during a pandemic, but I have said it, so let it be done. Farewell, my friends.